We're here to check out one of the best Yu-Gi-Oh games ever made, Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist of the Roses. Duelist of the Roses is a classic game that you must remember if you're watching this video, and today we're taking a retrospective look to answer the question, does it hold up in 2025? We gotta know, was it any good, or is it just rose-tinted glasses? Every pun intended there. Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist of the Roses was a game published by Konami exclusively for the PS2. This game was released in Japan in 2001 and internationally in 2003. And today, in 2025, we take a look back to see if it was really any good. The story is supposed to be a sequel to Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories, which is another Yu-Gi-Oh! Game that was made in 1999 on the original PlayStation. These games were coming out in a time where the Yu-Gi-Oh! Rules weren't really fully set in stone. This allowed for a lot of creativity in game mechanics, and now Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist of the Roses was supposed to be a sequel for only two reasons. At least, these are the only reasons that make sense to me. One reason is that Forbidden Memories took place in ancient Egypt, which could be put as far back as 3100 BC, and the Duelist of the Roses was based on the War of Roses, which was a power struggle that occurred towards the end of medieval times, like in the years of 1450 AD. So it was chronologically after Forbidden Memories. The other connection I could find is that during one of the endings, a character is summoned using all the rose cards, who happens to be brother of Nightmare from Forbidden Memories. Yes, time travel, the best story development any game could have, is present here, because what else would the plot be? Anyway, the whole premise of the game is that you are the Rose Duelist who is summoned from another time by the Yorkists, which are the good guys, Yugi and the crew, to help fight the Lancastrians, Seto and the other evil Yugi members from the show. However, you get a choice of who you want to fight. That is after an awful amount of dialogue. I mean, you could play this thing for 20 minutes in the background, clicking that X button on the PlayStation 2 controller, and still not start the game for 20, 30, maybe 40 minutes. It is absolutely ridiculous. As a kid, I felt the obvious choice was to pick Yugi and help the homie Joey Wheeler fight the powers of darkness, but as an adult, well, let's just say it was kind of a prick move to be summoned, and with the only way to get back to your world being collecting all of the white and red rose cards of power, which Seto offers to help you with anyway, and he wasn't the prick that summoned you. So, I mean, there's a moral dilemma there. I think maybe Seto might be the guy for you. Depending on which side you've chose, changes who you fight, but do not fear, after your first playthrough, you keep your cards and fight all of the battles that you didn't get to fight on the other side. So if you sided with Yugi, you fight Seto Kaiba's people, and if you sided with Seto Kaiba, you fight Yugi's people. Effectively, you get to go through both sides of the story, and when you finish both, it then gives you the option to replay any duel in the game in case you want to level up deck leaders, attain all the cards, play the duels again with your new deck, or even practice before playing against friends. Now, we gotta talk about the rest of the story, because the story is kinda cool. You're just using cards to go on a noble crusade through England, and you do your best Templar cosplay. It's explained to you in one long dialogue scene during the first 30 minutes of the game, and that damn near never talked about ever again with any sort of substance. The story really is a bit lackluster. It's not really mentioned much. You win and lose battles, and depending on that, the people you fight give you a certain amount of dialogue, and there's some short slideshow-like cutscenes, but that's really it. But what makes this game truly special, and really what we come to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Games for, is the combat system. The story is kinda cool because really you're just using your cards to go on a noble crusade through England and do your best Templar cosplay. It's explained to you in one long dialogue scene during the first 30 minutes of the game, and then damn near never talked about again with any substance. But what really makes this game truly special is the combat system. And let's be honest, are we playing any Yu-Gi-Oh! Games for the story? I don't personally know of a Yu-Gi-Oh! Game that has like this fantastically written story. Maybe we love the shows, the cartoons, the animes, whatever. But the games for the story, I think we all played them because we like the show and then we like Yu-Gi-Oh! Gameplay. Which leads me to the combat and basic controls. Now, For this, we have to take a step into that show we all remember and love. I always remembered season 2 of Yu-Gi-Oh! Where Merrick forces Yugi to play dice monsters, or when Yugi and Joey had to fight the Labyrinth brothers. I always thought it would be so cool to move your monsters around to gain a tactical advantage, and that's what this game allows you to do. They made this system based on chess, but it was definitely made in England and not India, right? It was definitely made in India. That being said, you have a deck leader, the king, which is a monster that can acquire unique abilities depending on the monster, which helps to change how you play the game. Meaning, different monsters gain different abilities. You can have one monster that's first ability is Card Finder, allows you to find certain hidden cards on the field. You get them for free. And that could be the only way you get that card. You can have another monster's first ability be double movement. So you can move your leader 2 times no matter the terrain in any direction. And this one is incredibly beneficial for kiting. Now there's some better ones, there's some worse ones. It really just depends what you want them for. But the experience you get is based on flipping cards face up and winning battles with that monster, which you can't do if they're your deck leader. However, you do get some experience as a deck leader because technically your card is flipped up. It's really not efficient. If you're playing through a regular game, you're probably not going to get any special abilities playing regularly unless you spend some time in custom battles and farming and all kinds of stuff. I think it's a really poor system. Great idea, poor execution, unfortunately. This deck leader, with or without powers, is the monster that roams the field of battle using star points to place other monsters. So when the game starts, the only 2 monsters on the field are your deck leaders, yours and your opponent's, and they can't attack. They cannot do battle. They can move, they can summon, and they can get beat up or use cool powers, or they can look sick. And that's what matters the most. You know, who cares about the powers? But when you got like Dark Magician or Blue Eyes as your deck leader, you know, style points will win you the duel alone. Once you find the sickest looking monster, then you're ready to do battle. Okay? The sickest looking monster is based on the deck you first start because, it's all you got. You can switch your deck leader at any time for pretty much any monster card. I don't know of any limitations. Any monster card you have. So if you want a different monster, you're going to have to farm it. That being said, you roam the field with your king, your deck leader, and you use star points to place other monsters down to attack like little minions. You gain X amount of star points per turn. Exactly 3, I believe. I want to say you start 4, but who knows. I know you gain 3 star points every turn, and whatever your card star level is, that's the amount of stars you have to use to summon them. So if you got Karibo, it's 1 stars. If you got Zombie Hands, it's 2. Blackland Fire Dragons, 3. So on and so forth. The only difference is fusions, which we'll get to in just a second. But first, you gotta know you only get 4,000 points of damage. The object is to beat your opponent into submission, dealing 4,000 life points worth of damage to their deck leader. You can do this using your monsters or using spells to do damage to them. Alternatively, you can checkmate them, just like in chess. You know, checkmates, the king can't move anywhere. Just the same in this game, if the king is stuck, it cannot summon and it cannot move. So you've surrounded him thoroughly up against, labyrinth terrain or with just your monsters. They submit, they lose, they cannot do anything. It's an automatic forfeiture for them. The deck leader can move 1 space in any direction, up, down, left, or right, and summoning can be done 1 space anywhere around your deck leader. So that's up, down, left, right, plus the diagonal squares. So you could essentially summon 2 spaces ahead of where you start if you move then summon, and then your card, after being summoned, is allowed to move immediately once again. And it can move 1 or 2 spaces depending on the terrain under the card and whether the card is face up or face down. No matter what, however, the card is always allowed to move 1 space, but anytime you move, you lose the defensive position. So if it's in defense position, you move 1, it moves and spins into attack position. So just know you have to be willing to take an attack in attack position if you want the card to move. Spells and traps are just the same with movement. You can move them in 1 space, up, down, left, or right, any direction. That is not diagonal. You can flip them face up and still move them, provided the effect doesn't go off. So if you flip a terrain card, it's going to change the terrain around it. Its effect's going to go off where it ends its turn. So if you flip and move up 1 space, the spell will activate in that new space it occupies. Traps are the same. However, traps are usually things that need to be ran over or moved next to, so they typically don't go off when they're flipped face up, and the opponent can just kind of see what they are. I'm not sure how the AI moves around it. I don't know if I've ever done that just because it feels like revealing my hand. However, it is the AI, so they already kind of know what the card is. I don't know. You are limited to placing 1 card per turn, no matter what it is, spell, trap, or monster. You only get 1 card to place. So place it wisely. Do something you need, place it. Don't put something down you don't need because you have to wait a whole nother turn to place it down. Relatively, you're okay in the beginning, but if you're being walked up on by a beef stick, you might need to place something that can defend yourself. Now, there is a way to discard and fuse monsters. This is by pressing up on the D-pad. It'll show 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to numbering 5, because you can only have 5 cards in your hand. And it'll go through and put the number 1 card first, the second card behind that one, the third card behind that one, the 4th card, and so on to the 5th. If they confuse, cards 1 and 2 will fuse. If not, the card number 1 will get kicked, and card number 2 will take its place. Then card number 3 will come over. If it fuses, it can fuse. Or if it's an equip card and can be equipped, it'll equip. If not, card 2 gets kicked out and discarded, goes straight to the graveyard, so on and so forth to the 5th. This is a great way to get rid of your hand, mill your hand. Essentially, you only need a couple turns to get through your whole deck. So if your deck relies on 5 cards, you can reliably get those 5 cards typically in any given duel before a monster reaches you on your side of the field. This is with favorable terrain to whatever duelist you're fighting typically. To prove that you are the superior crusader, you have to use a lower deck card, so theoretically a worse deck, but not really, and you'll see later on, because it really just depends on the fusions when I get to that section. But the terrain really matters a lot. It'll give any face-up monster the same type, and when you duel, your monster automatically goes face up. 500 extra attack points. Now, this only goes to 500 attack points, not defense points. This is very key. If you have favorable terrain and you put your card in defense mode, it will not utilize this buff. At the same time, there are types of terrain that will decrease certain types of monster. Let's take meadow terrain for an example. It boosts monsters like warrior monsters. Any warrior monster on meadow terrain automatically gets an extra 500 attack. This is not the same for spellcaster type monsters. If you are a spellcaster monster on meadows terrain, you lose 500 to attack. So potentially at any point there could be an 1,000 attack point difference from a monster on certain type of terrains. If they have Dark Magician, it loses 500 attack. You now have 2,000. If you have something with 1,500 attack, it gains 500, so it's now 2,000. You could beat the bricks off that Dark Magician until you've died, but lose both monsters. But then you will have taken out essentially a monster with 1,000 more attack than you. So terrain is very beneficial for that alone. But you also have the face-up movement buff. So if you have favorable terrain, a warrior monster on meadow type terrain, you can move 2 spaces instead of 1. This means that if you are in favorable terrain, the opponent's deck leader cannot get away. It can only move 1 space, and you can move 2, so you can attack it as it moves. This requires it to leave a card behind itself, which will stop your movement, because you can only move 2 open spaces. If there's a card in your way and you attack it, you stop there. There are 10 terrain types in this game, but only 7 of them give a buff. Those are forest, meadow, dark, sea, wasteland, mountain, and tune. Those 7 will give a buff or a debuff to your monster, so it's beneficial to know what type of terrain your monsters need to get buffed. Usually your deck will start with a terrain card, but this is not the same for all decks. Some decks end up with a labyrinth. A labyrinth terrain is a terrain that is essentially blocked. You can't go through it. You have to go around it. You can't play cards on it. With an exception of a couple of cards that can walk through it, like Labyrinth Tank. Okay, these are cards that have specific interactions with the labyrinth terrain. Crush terrain is another exception. With this terrain, destroying any monster that has 1,500 or more attack that steps on it instantly gets destroyed. No battles, no nothing, no funny business. Gone. Get it? Good. No, you can't get it back. It is in your graveyard. It's gone. So if you want to step on Crush Terrain, you need to step on it with your deck leader or with a monster that has 1,400 or less attack. Only the attack stat matters. Okay, it does not matter if you have 1,600 defense, your monster will be fine as long as it has 1,400 or less attack. The final type of terrain is normal type terrain. This is a terrain that is normal. There's no benefits, no downsides. It's an even playing field. You put your monster, the opponent puts their monster. Yeah, duel, baby. That's it. Nothing else to it. The main ways to overcome the terrain is to use fusion and equip cards to create monsters so strong that they can ignore the terrain penalty, and to use terrain cards to increase your monster's attack and add movement or decrease the opponent's monster's attack. Now, terrain cards are, the first way I beat this game when I was a wee lad, and that is they're cards, spell cards, that when flipped face up, change the terrain it's on and surrounding terrain in 2 spaces in any direction. So 2 to the right, 2 to the left, 2 up, 2 down, and even the diagonal, although not 2 in a diagonal, to whatever type of terrain the spell card is. So if you have a mountain card, it changes all that terrain into mountain cards. So you could use your beneficial terrain and it gets rid of their beneficial terrain. Alternatively, if you've done some farming, you can also just put some beef sticks down. These are monsters that would usually require tribute summons. In this game with the star system, it does not. You would have to spend a couple turns saving up your stars to summon a 10 to 12 star monster. Right? 12 stars is 4 turns if you're getting 3 stars per turn. And then you can have not free, it takes 12 stars, but you can have a strong monster without losing any cards on the field. You can do this while also putting down spells and trap cards, because spells and trap cards cost 0 stars to use. So if you put down a trap card, remember you can only put down 1 card, but you've just saved yourself 3 stars for next turn. Furthermore, you can use this to discard lots of cards. So if you have some fusion monsters or some strong cards towards the end of your deck, you can discard most of your hand, place down a trap or a spell card, and you would still retain those stars. That brings us to fusion monsters. I'm going to be honest, the game really does not help you with this. it wants you just to figure it out for yourself. It might even hate you a little bit. But once you figure out some fusion monsters, and as I mentioned earlier, you might want to look up a nice little list with all their benefits or requirements to fuse. Then you start to put out some strong monsters utilizing your weak ones. And your weak normal monsters, that is, not your effect monsters. Because the effect monsters could be pretty useful. Although never as useful almost as another fusion monster. When fusing cards, you need at least two. You put them in the 1-2. If they don't fuse, because you've done it wrong, then they act like a discarded one. So you'll place the second card down. So if you're a little worried about it and you don't know exactly what it fuses, I would put the card you want more as the second card to place down. Furthermore, you can fuse multiple cards in one chain. So you can do mark 3 or 4 cards. The first 2 will fuse. That new monster you have will fuse with a third one. If that one fuses, it'll fuse with the fourth one. And so on and so forth, up to your whole hand, which is 5 cards. Or you can fuse and also place an equip card on it. So you can fuse 2 monsters, equip card, and you can do that all in one turn and instantly have a super strong monster. However, to get 2 fusions, you put them first, they fuse, you make a strong card, you put a card down that doesn't fuse, you're kind of boned. I'm going to be honest with you. You messed up. It discards your first fusion monster. And then all you can do is pray and hope that your 4th monster or your 5th one will fuse with the ones previous because you messed up the chain. So you got to be very intentional about how you utilize your cards and fusions. Now, if you want the fun way to play, you want to figure out and go, you're probably going to fumble over yourself as you discard most of the cards in your hand. You know, it's part of the charm of the game, especially when you were young, just throwing all your cards in your hand to see whatever fuses. And trying to figure it out, I mean, I played this game, who knows, when I was 8, 10 years old. It was not the play. Let me tell you, this game has requirements with attack, with defense, monster types, and then you get confused with the terrain and showing a buffed up attack. You really got to get your cards down. And some of the super strong monsters like Aqua Dragon, which I love to make, have the most difficult requirements to make, it feels like. This is further compounded by the fact that sometimes you make a monster you don't want to make. It gives you the wrong monster type, which leads to, instead of a buff on your terrain, a debuff, which means that fusion monster you work so hard to plan out to try to get just gets booty blasted by another monster from the AI. Thankfully, each deck starts with a good majority of fusions you can use. It's just about figuring it out. I haven't found a deck that has 0 fusions, but that being said, that doesn't mean it's out there. I'm fairly certain I've used all the starting decks, but that's something I didn't really look into. And I'd be curious to know if you guys know of any decks that don't start with any fusions. There are some decks that have lackluster fusions and involve more lower monsters being buffed, but, you know, that's also part of the fun of that deck, right? You get to choose from all these decks in the beginning. You get 3 choices no matter what you pick, and it's based on your letter. So I just choose the one that looks the coolest because style points win you the match, like I said earlier. You can also use a little strategy that I like to use, which is just to discard your whole hand continuously. And this works pretty well if you have 1 or 2 cards that are kind of your win condition. Say you have a labyrinth, or not a labyrinth, but a terrain card and a monster card that gets buffed by the terrain that's already super strong, and you can just run down an opposing opponent that doesn't have anything that gets buffed by that terrain. Doesn't really matter to the opponent. That works, 9 times out of 10, unless they are also buffed up by the same terrain. This strategy might not work out so well. But if that's the case, you can continuously discard your whole hand and continuously pull your own hand, going through your whole deck in what feels like a couple turns to find the right cards you need, and also determining what fuses and what doesn't in that time. You do this for a couple games, and you'll have at least a couple fusions that you can utilize throughout the rest of the game. This leads us to the battle maps. Each character has a unique battle map based on their type typically. Now, some of them kind of suck. I'm going to be honest with you. We're right in this game. Some of these maps suck, and they suck bad. But each battle takes place on a unique map, sculpted to reflect typically the deck of your opponent. Typically, mostly. The map designs are typically better when fighting Kaiba's Crusaders than when dealing with Yugi's crew. Typically, the terrain favors those who yield. This means that boosts their movement and attack being the majority of the field. This means that Weevil will have mainly force to power up his bugs. There will typically also be some pockets of landscape that won't boost them, right? And Weevil's deck is the worst at this, as there's, as far as I know, I think 3 or 4 wastelands on the field, and literally the rest of the terrain is forest terrain that he benefits from. But most of these, even with Nightmare being an exception, also, because he only has a couple forests in the corner, it's not that useful unless you're just on full defense mode. But most of these will have places where you can take advantage. It's just about luring the AI over there. And the AI can be stupid at times. So as long as you don't have a face-up monster, they'll typically go for it. Now, sometimes the maps are a bit chaotic, and they're just random hodgepodge of stuff put together. You know, the most egregious of this being Tristan and Joey on Yugi's side. You get this a lot through Yugi's campaign, or when fighting Yugi, siding with Kaiba and fighting Yugi. Their maps are just atrocious over there. So siding with Yugi, you get a lot better maps, I think, anyway, or a lot more thematic maps. And then the other maps on Yugi's side are not as thematic. Sometimes they're easy to take advantage of because the opponent just can't. They don't have anything good with most terrain. It's a little easier. When you beat an opponent, you get to gamble. And oh, baby, do we love to gamble. You can collect cards to use in battle to supplement your deck with a gambling slot machine, where if you get 3 of the same cards, you get a unique card that is typically stronger. So if you hit the jackpot, you get an even stronger card. Get 3 Dark Magicians from Yugi, you end up with Dark Magician Girl that gets boosted from all the Dark Magicians you got. However, getting 3 of the same card still only nets you 1 of that card, which absolutely sucks balls. Who thought this was a good game mechanic? Who thought they would be more grindy? So if you get 2 and then you don't get the 3rd one, you just get 1 of that card and you don't get the jackpot. Sucks to suck, loser. This leads to a crippling gambling and addiction, and I'm trying to collect them all, baby. I've spent hours farming characters just to build decks like Dark Magician, or make monsters like Thousand Year Dragons, or Red Eyes Black Dragon, which, if you know anything about any Yu-Gi-Oh card I've been playing, the 4 viewers I'll get from posting this video, Red Eyes Black Dragon is my favorite card and my favorite deck to build in any Yu-Gi-Oh type Yu-Gi-Oh game. Real life cards ever made possible. It is just the best. Anyone that says different, blasphemy. I don't believe it. That being said, if you don't want to gamble to get your cards, there is always one other way to get cards, and that is by the reincarnation system. This is a unique mechanic that allows you to permanently discard a card to earn 3 different cards that may or may not be what you want. You can use this mechanic after every 5 campaign duels, so you still gotta gamble a little bit, at least worth 15 cards worth. If I can do math, I cannot do math. 5 times 3, I can do math. Look at that, I'm leaving that in. 15 cards worth of gambling to gain 1 reincarnation, so then you can discard 1 of those cards. This is to help bolster your deck and is more gambling, baby, because you don't really know what you need unless you look it up. Now, there are codes, like I said, you can look it up. You can see what card you discard in the reincarnation system. People have done the data mining. They figure out what 3 cards you're going to get. As far as I know, it's 100% guaranteed. Discard this card, you get 3 more. I've never done that. I like the gambling. I'm going to do each one. And I find the stronger card you discard, the stronger cards you get in return. And sometimes they're even thematically connected to it. However, not always. There are a total of 854 cards in the game, and that is a whole lot of gambling to ensure that you get all the cards if that is throughout your playing. Honestly, the whole reincarnation system goes over my head. Like I said, I just hit them with the old discard strong, I don't need it, let's see what I get, baby. Gambling is the way to go, especially in this game. They encourage it. However, you better not gamble. Gambling is bad. Only gamble in video games that doesn't cost you real money. That's the only time I gamble. I would never even gamble, even in Vegas, because I would lose and break down crying, marry a dude in one of the Vegas churches to get my money back, divorce him, Hope that he makes more than me. He doesn't. I lose more money. I've just gambled on a marriage. You just spiral out. You spiral out of control. That leads us to the routes that you can take. There are two choices. You can either fight Kaiba first or fight Yugi by joining the other. So if you want to fight Yugi, you join Kaiba first. If you want to fight Kaiba, you join Yugi first. Either way, you can do it and go through the whole game. You beat one side, you start over. It forces you to go to the other side with the same deck, and you get to keep all your cards, and then you fight the other side. So don't worry about it too much. Just pick whichever one you want to do more in the first part. Each route, respectively, unlocks a different set of opponents. If you beat Rex, you unlock Darkness Ruler and Necromancer. If you beat Weevil, you unlock Pegasus and Bandit Keith. This is for obviously when siding with Yugi and fighting Kaiba. Then we're moving on to Yugi's path. It is completely linear. You start with the fight against Tay, then move on to Tristan, Mai, Mako, Joey, Shadi, Grandpa, Bakura, Yugi, and finally, again, the freaking weird name on Wadden Fablir, which I'm assuming is Egyptian, but I have absolutely zero clue. The first choice against Kaiba's Crusaders is Weevil or Rex. Weevil is a bug duelist who attempts to overwhelm you using the Forest to power up his monster cards. With more than 90% of the field being Forest, it can be tough to get a monster close to him if you know nothing about the game. I mainly beat him as a child using terrain transforming magic cards to nullify his Forest. You could also play around the couple of wasteland squares dotting your side of the map. However, this allows him to summon his ultimate moth monster to boost attack, and then you're really in trouble. I recommend charging forward, getting as close as you can, beating him down with strong monsters or equip cards or fusion cards, or utilizing a terrain card, discarding cards quickly to get it, and moving forward non-stop, even with your deck leader. When fighting Rex Raptor, Rex fights in the same way as Weevil, with the whole field of playable terrain boosting his dinosaur-type monsters. The other spaces are labyrinths, which can only be moved through by special types of cards like labyrinth tanks. This funnels your cards down paths, 5 of them, forcing you to fight his monsters on his terrain unless you have a terrain-changing type card. Terrain cards can be used to change the wasteland field, but not the labyrinth terrain, as that's how terrain works, as only special cards can change those. And those are Removal, Labyrinth, which really removes one of them, which could be pretty much worthless, so I wouldn't rely on it. Rex uses some dinosaur monsters and some fusion dinosaur monsters to really stomp all over this terrain, and you're going to need some pretty strong monsters yourself, at least 2,500 attack if you want to even think about walking forward on him. If he doesn't fuse and power increase, you got a pretty good chance. If he fuses and power increases, you better get a little tactical with your play, let's say. And on a side note, Rex has a card that destroys all zombie-type monsters on the field. This might have led to my demise a time or two, as I didn't know he had this card. The last time I played this, I played with a full zombie deck. Not a full zombie deck. I had a card that changed everything to zombie, using Pumpkin to power up all my zombies, which made it a full zombie deck. I used that card. I had him beat. I was just messing around, getting some points to level up my monsters, maybe get a new leader put in, and he used that card. I lost. I couldn't believe my eyes. I cried myself to sleep that night. I would not recommend it. Be wary of his spell cards sometimes if you're running a zombie type deck. After Rex, you have the option of either fighting Necromancer or Darkness Ruler. Necromancer is a split field of meadow and wasteland that is mostly split by some aqua serving as a river. He fields zombie monsters with his deck leader of Pumpkin, increasing all of his zombie monsters around him by an extra 500 attack. He sends his zombie monsters to you, so if your deck is weaker, you can hang back off the wasteland and let him lose his wasteland buff and come onto the meadow or the water. Alternatively, you can rush him down and hope you can get a direct attack before his mega boosted monsters beat you down. Darkness Ruler is quite the opposite. He uses a Fiend deck and a field of Yami to dominate with strong monsters. The map has areas in opposite corners with some forest terrain. However, I find they are rarely used unless you need to retreat there. Darkness Ruler usually steps up cautiously with his cards in a square around him and uses many dangerous traps and spell cards to block your path and boost his Fiend type monsters. Beware when you become the aggressor or if he moves a card forward one space when he should flip and attack over 2 spaces. That means it is likely a strong spell or trap card that he I can't speak, but we're leaving that in, baby, that he plans to use to trick you and maybe permanently paralyze your monster. If he flips and attacks, you know he's got a stronger monster, and, well, you can see the attack at that point. But he likes to show up, so you can work around him and his traps and spells. If you've made it this far, we enter the more interesting characters, like Pegasus. Pegasus uses a Toon deck to shell up while he beats you down with powerful spell cards like Tremendous Fire that deals 1,000 direct life point damage. This, in combination with Mimicat, allows him to beat you without even moving a card forward. It's pretty stupid. Don't sit back, you gotta go to him. On his Toon terrain, you're pretty screwed, and he's not. No matter what card you put down, unless you've also already beat him and have a Toon card. So, good luck with that. On top of this, if the player places a monster next to their deck master, Pegasus often activates Brain Control or Change of Heart to temporarily take control of the monster and attack you directly. Absolutely ridiculous. This man is trying to beat you in submission without lifting a finger in true Pegasus fashion. When fighting Pegasus, he often uses spell, trap, and effect card monsters to stall you out on his Toon terrain. He will use cards that will spellbind you and lower your monster's attack to take even more advantage of that terrain type and beat you down while you're spellbound, or just stall you as he mills cards for his Tremendous Fire. He is a duelist that you actually do not collect a rose card from, because as Yugi's stepfather, he is secretly on your side, which you find out a bit later after collecting the rest of the rose cards. Bandit Keith is another duelist that has all wasteland and labyrinth terrain on his field. Although it is ranged differently, it still causes cards to funnel through a couple of key locations. He usually plays a strategy where he uses 3 monsters with high attack to try and box the enemy deck leader in, sending one left, right, and right down the middle. These monsters are typically machine type monsters and are boosted on the wasteland terrain. Keith has some high base attack cards, and as such, you need some yourself, or you need to be able to change the terrain into your favor. Keith has also changed his signature USA do-rag for a Union flag do-rag. How freaking audacious. It doesn't make any sense. The American gangster has gone British and is about to stab Mandem, or whatever they say over there. Great Britain wasn't even made. I don't even know why they have an English flag. Like, the Union flag wasn't there yet. I don't know. He's crazy. He's stupid. I want him to come back. The American gangster. Next up is Labyrinth Ruler. Labyrinth Ruler is the Duelist of Roses version of the Labyrinth Mage, who is part of the Rose Crusaders. Labyrinth Ruler has many different types of terrain scattered across a maze of labyrinth terrain, with crush terrain at key points. It forces you to move your stronger monsters one right through the labyrinth, with his deck mostly focusing on cutting off the right half of the field with Labyrinth Roll, or Magical Labyrinth, to prevent strong monsters from reaching his deck leader in conjunction with the crush terrain. And summoning monsters advantageous to the labyrinth terrain, and that will walk through the labyrinth terrain to attack you. So you go through the maze, as a labyrinth is a maze. Your strong monsters have to take the long walk around, and then if he uses his labyrinth wall, then you're pretty much screwed. You got to funnel through one side. You can't go through both. You can't slide your way around him through the crush terrain. And he walks through with Labyrinth Trank and Wall Shadow to attack you directly if you're not careful. So you got to post up where you got some room and are not next to a wall, or on the other side of the wall you have a monster guarding it. After that, you fight Ishtar. Ishtar is the Yu-Gi-Oh! The Duelist of Roses incarnation of Ishizu Ishtar. She's a member of the White Roses and is located at the Isle of Man. After the player defeats Pegasus Crawford, they can face Ishtar. After beating her, all the previous paths converge and Bosworth appears in the middle of the map where Richard Slysheen is located. Ishtar uses a water deck. Many of her monsters have 1500 or lower attack, allowing them to cross the crushed terrain in the middle of the field. To compensate for their low attack, she can strengthen most of them through the Yumi terrain and a number of power-ups, and have the attack of all her opponent's monsters with Mirror Wall. The strongest monster she can summon is Crab Turtle through the ritual Turtle Oath, and she presents a pretty straightforward fight on and off the crushed terrain. I usually beat her by taking 1400 attack monsters and just rushing them across the rush terrain with one big monster that can take anything on the Yumi terrain, so it forces her to be next to the little ones, and I just attack her directly. This brings us to King Richard, or Richard Slicing of York, who is kind of psychopathic man set on acquiring the millennial items. To gain great power, though he makes no appearance in anime or manga, Haishin has played a prominent role in several video games based on the Yu-Gi-Oh series, often acting as the main antagonist in the initial stages of the game to be killed off and later replaced by a much more powerful villain. This is something that has been done time and time again if you played the old school Yu-Gi-Oh games. Though his role generally differs from one game to the next, his ambitions of grabbing power and glory remain the same. Richard Slicing plays a warrior/beast warrior deck, with his deck leader Battlesteer as the abilities to reduce the level cost for summoning same type monsters and extend support range and give movement boosts to the same type monsters. True to his status as king, he keeps his deck leader safely away from attacks and sends minions out to fight. With mainly meadow terrain boosts, he boosts his warrior deck to high attack stats to fight your monsters with. If you stay away from the middle, you have one square worth of tile of mountain that rings the entire outside, so you can potentially move along the mountain if you need some mountain. Otherwise, it's all meadow in the middle, and he likes to take advantage of that. If you've come this far, you only have two more duels left, one of them being C. Seto Rosencruz. He is the Yu-Gi-Oh! Duels to the Roses incarnation of Seto Kaiba and the portrayal of Christian Rosencruz. He is a member of the White Roses of York, with Seto playing a deck mainly based on Seto Kaiba's, containing many of his cards from the Duelist Kingdom arc in the show. His spell cards focus on increasing the attack of his monsters, and his trap cards deal with negating harmful moves dealt by his opponent. The historical figure he portrays has a mythos that makes it seem as though he lived to the age of 106, and thus it is difficult to know if the person, historically or not, truly was still alive during the setting of the game. You fight Kaiba at Stonehenge, which is the same place you fight the main bosses at the end of the game. Now, I didn't know how to refight him after I beat him the first time and beat the game. That is, you have to click R1 or L1 on the controller to cycle through all the enemies you can fight at Stonehenge. Now that you've come this far, you're fighting the final duel of this side of the campaign. This is against Manwaden Fablier. He is the final battle against both campaigns, although with slightly different decks and terrain. Manwaden Fablier is the incarnation of Dark Knight and portrayal of Welsh mythological figure Manwaden, son of Lear. He serves as the antagonist of the game and is the only opponent the player will face irrespective of which team they side with, red or white roses. He will imply that he is Nightmare's brother when summoned if the player chooses to follow the Yorkists by saying, "First, you humans awakened my brother from the sands of Egypt and sealed him away again." In Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories, Nightmare is known to be the creator of the Shadow Games. He is sealed away in the Forbidden Runes, only to be awoken when the 7 millennial items are brought there. Manwaden Fablier uses two decks with two different deck leaders. The player faces the Skull Knight version if they choose to side with the red roses, and the Chakra version if they side with the white roses. The Chakra deck uses mainly monster cards with attack points of 2,400 or more, and the Skull Knight one is primarily magic and trap cards that inflict damage. Although, the scariest thing in my opinion is the uber buffing cards by an extra 2,000 attack using equip cards. It just says force equip. I don't know what that means. I couldn't get the cards. He just likes to absolutely beat you down with them. After you beat Manwaden Fablier and his Skull Knight deck, if you are finishing the path we have laid out, then you start the game over and side with the White Roses, which leads you to your first battle with Taya. Taya is the Yu-Gi-Oh! Duels to the Roses incarnation of Taya Gardner. She is a member of the Red Roses of Lancaster, and she is the Yu-Gi-Oh! Portrayal of historical person Elizabeth of York. As she says, she was unable to protect her love after she is defeated, giving a clue to her identity. Taya plays a fairy deck, which she often uses to fuse to Dark Witch. Her monsters and strategies are very weak. She is the most easy to defeat out of the Red Roses, and has a battlefield mixed with normal and mountain terrain, which powers up her fairy type monsters. You could stay off the mountain terrain pretty easily and stay on the normal terrain and just move forward on her. As long as she doesn't fuse, her monsters are super weak, and as long as they are not on the mountain terrain, you really shouldn't have much of a problem. Next up on your hit list is T. Tristan Gray. He is the Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist of the Roses incarnation of Tristan Taylor and a portrayal of Thomas Gray. He is a member of the Red Roses of Lancaster, and he focuses on brute force. He deploys his monsters to the line of terrain that they are most favorable to. The player's best chance is to pick terrain area and monsters unaffected negatively or at all, with strips of terrain across, with each line being one type of terrain. So just pick the line most beneficial to you, or that you at least don't get negative effects to, and focus on attacking through that. Next on the list is Margaret My Beaufort, which is the Duelist of the Roses incarnation of My Valentine and portrayal of Lady Margaret Beaufort. She is a member of the Red Roses of Lancaster, with the White Roses of York well ahead in their struggle for the power of the Red Roses. Margaret secretly requested a High Druid, Simon McMorrin, to summon a duelist from another age. The player takes on the role of that very duelist right in the beginning of the game when there's an unreasonable amount of dialogue. Margaret's deck consists mainly of monsters that gain a bonus from the mountain terrain and equips to support them, including many cards from the Harpy series. Along with that, she has double movement for her leader and uses trap cards to help keep her safe. If pushed to the edge, the player can make use of the wasteland on either side of the map to help fight her monsters without the terrain buff from the mountains. Next up is Mako. Mako is the Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist of Roses incarnation of Mako Tsunami, and if the player sides with the right roses to be on this path, they meet Mako on the boat from Dover to the continent. So you're leaving from one to the next. Mako agrees to take the player to the continent if they can defeat him in a duel. A glitch sometimes occurs if the player's deck cost is higher than Mako's, the game will freeze. This is to do with the rule stating that the player cannot duel someone whose deck cost is lower than theirs. Since Mako duels at sea, nearly all monsters get a power boost from the sea terrain. He often fuses his monsters to summon Aqua Dragon, which turns any square it battles on into water, automatically ensuring its 500 attack. His terrain is mostly sea with some meadow in the opposite corners. So if he has Aqua Dragon, the meadow is not going to help you because it'll be turned to sea. If he has Aqua Dragon, any terrain card you place down will not help you on fighting Aqua Dragon because he will change that terrain to the sea. After defeating Mako, it leads to the man, the myth, the legend, Joey. Joey is the Yu-Gi-Oh! The Duelist of the Roses incarnation of Joey Wheeler and portrayal of Christopher Urswick. He's a member of the Red Roses of Lancaster, and his deck mostly focuses on the random monsters his original incarnation, Joey Wheeler, used for both his decks, such as Warriors, Dragons, and Beast Warriors. Joey likes to take a wait-and-see approach to dueling, unlike Anime Joey, who we all know likes to get in there and get it cracking. Joey tends to move his deck master to one corner off the board while sending out his monsters to win the duel for him. Players are advised to move into the toon terrain on the board to lessen the chances of losing major points. His terrain is much like Tristan's, with long lines of each type but flipped from horizontal to vertical lines. So you could just move all the way down on one vertical line to take advantage of one of terrain. After whooping Joey, next up is Shoddy. Shoddy is the Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist of the Roses incarnation of, Shoddy, and a portrayal of John Morton. He is a member of the Red Roses and is located at Paris, reflecting his original incarnation's lack of emotion. If you slap this man silly, he doesn't say nothing on defeat or victory. Man does not care. Smack him on the head. No, nothing to say about it. He uses a Millennium deck, and among his strategies, he uses the Crush Terrain to protect his monsters. It's typically best to pack as many field spell cards to change his Crush Terrain to your favorite. Make sure your deck leader is not at stake just to get direct attack on his Millennium Golem. The other terrain types are Yami, Forest, Wasteland, and Aqua, with all four sides of the map, or four corners, being different types. One type each, Crush Terrain, splitting them up. All in all, not a bad fight as long as you can get past that Crush Terrain and boost at least on two types of terrain or use a field spell. Next up is the fan favorite Grandpa, aka Jasper Dice Trudor. He is the Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist to the Roses incarnation of Solomon Muto and a portrayal of Jasper Tudor. He is a member of the Red Roses located at Le Mans. Jasper uses an Exodia deck with Labyrinth squares to shield himself while he summons pieces of Exodia. It is best to summon high attack monsters and push back his offensive cards. If one of your monsters is in the way after being paralyzed and there is an empty square, you can summon a new card in, go over it, and send it to the graveyard to keep it pushing. When all the pieces of Exodia have been put together, he instantly wins. No ifs, ands, or buts. Game over. You lose. He also uses cards like Final Flame to deal direct damage to your life points. If you have access to cards like a Labyrinth Tank, you can enter through the walls and attack him directly or destroy his Exodia pieces. Your half of the field has meadow with the rest of the surrounding area pieces of the labyrinth being surrounded by mountains and sea, and the inside of the labyrinth being Yami. After Grandpa, you face Bakura. Bakura is the Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist to the Roses incarnation of Yami Bakura, and he is a member of the Red Roses and located at Rennes. He claims to also answer to Jack Kane, or Mortimer, the leader of the 1450 Kent Revolt against Henry VI. Bakura plays a beast/plant deck. Among his strategies, he uses the Crush terrain to protect his plant monsters and Forest to boost his plant type attack. He gains life points as part of his strategy, but other than that, he's a fairly straightforward fight. You want to just push forward, get past the Crush terrain, and attack him directly or his monsters. I find they're usually fairly weak because they're meant to be played on and around the Crush terrain. This leads us to the final two fights of this path. The first being Henry Tudor, aka Yugi, the incarnation of Yami Yugi and portrayal of Henry Tudor, Henry VII of England. He is the king of the Red Roses of Lancaster. In the beginning of the game, he says that his name is Henry Tudor, but he has become tiresome of his name and prefers to be called Yugi. Henry Tudor plays with a deck mainly based on Yugimoto's Duelist Kingdom deck, but also contains Dark Magician Girl. When the player faces Yugi, the field contains every type of terrain. He has at least one monster who will gain strength from each terrain except Sea or Crush. His map is mismatched terrain of every terrain type throughout the map with no two of the same terrain touching, meaning there's not much of a strategy other than parking some of your cards on some strong terrain and attacking after you know what card is on his terrain, or utilizing, once again, a field spell. Hopefully you can see how powerful those are in this game. Field spells go crazy. After you beat Yugi, the final fight is Monwaden Fablier with his Chakra deck, having Crush inside the Labyrinth terrain. And this finally brings me to my thoughts on the whole game. Although the story might be somewhat lackluster, we gotta be honest, we don't play all the Yu-Gi-Oh! Games for the best cinematic masterpiece story, but we play them because we love the nostalgia it brings and gameplay that Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards provide. At least the older games, that's the way I feel, typically. If there is a cinematic masterpiece to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Series, I'd love to play it, so please let me know. I hope that you could bring yourself to try this amazing, criminally underrated game of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Franchise, and that you do it in the most legal way possible. If watching a playthrough of this game is something you're interested in, then visit my Let's Play channel in the YouTube description, where I plan to play all the nostalgia games you forgot about from the 90s and 2000s decades of gaming before making a review here. Overall, Duelist of the Roses is a must-try game from the PS2 era that is still one of the most successful, unique takes on Yu-Gi-Oh! Gameplay, and if you beat the game and loved it, but thought it was too easy, you can always grab the Redux mod to up the difficulty, along with better fusions, maps, and more cards, with stronger AI. It really is something that makes the whole game completely different. This is a game that, if you like tactics games, like, I don't know, XCOM, but also are nostalgic for Yu-Gi-Oh!, it is highly underrated. It often gets overlooked when they make new bundles of Yu-Gi-Oh! Games, and it's something they need to remake. It would be such a big hit. But, you know, what could you do? If you've made it to the end of this video, you probably already love the game, so I don't need to tell you. But get out, go play it. Go play it one more time. Go play it for the first time in 10 years. This game is still good in 2025. Let me tell you, I had an absolute blast, and that was without the Redux mod, which I am now going to go get and play it again to enjoy it even more. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Peace.